everyone. Hi, we are at noon, so we're going to go ahead and get this show on the road. My name is John Morton. I'm the director of the Tennessee Archive of Moving Image and Sound, or TAMIS, as you probably all know it as, since you've all been so good as to turn out for us this afternoon. This presentation is tying into the exhibit that we have going on right now in conjunction with the East Tennessee Historical Society. That's just down the hallway in this building. It's an exhibit that explores our region's relationship to the film and the movies from a variety of different perspectives. So I invite you to go see that if you haven't. And to support that exhibit, as I said, we're kind of being really deliberate in preparing lectures and screenings and events. This being one of those. So TAMIS is a department of the Knox County Public Library, and it's really thanks to the existence of this department, the early story of which Louisa Trott will be telling you in a couple minutes, that we were able to put on the exhibit as richly as we've been able to. TAMIS is a relatively young organization. Lots of the peer regional film archives are kind of relatively young, so this is a field that's still kind of, in many ways, growing and figuring out how to do its mission and to interact with other similar organizations as well. So I'm expecting to learn a lot of new information today from my predecessor, Louisa, and I hope that it's interesting and informative to you as well. We wish that Eric Dawson, who's the director of the McClung Historical Collection, could be here today. Unfortunately, he's not able to be here, but he's been involved with TAMIS in the past, and he has a lot of insights on the topic as well. So we are going to do our best to represent TAMIS without him here. But any further questions that he might be able to speak to, if you bring them to us, we'll be able to pass them along to him. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Louisa Trott, who is one of the co-founders of TAMIS. Currently has a job at the University of Tennessee. She's going to tell us about the founding and the early years of the archive. Thank you, Louisa.
Thank you. Okay, just testing the volume. Everyone hear me okay? Oh, hi. Just spotting people in the audience, I know. This is a kind of a trip down memory lane for me, being back here after all these years. So I'm really pleased to be here. So thanks for inviting me to be part of this, and thanks to everyone for the incredible work that has gone into the exhibit here. And so, yeah, as John said, I'm going to start off by giving a bit of background, the history of TAMIS, and then John and Janine, the current archivists at TAMIS, are going to talk through a little bit more about what's happened since the very beginnings, and hopefully what's going to happen in the future, a bright future. Okay, so this is where it all started. 2004, Orphans Film Symposium, and this was actually 19 years ago, almost to the day. I think it was like around about the 20-something, what was it? Doesn't say on there, but it's 20-something of March, so it's almost 19 years ago to the day. So I was here in at Columbia, South Carolina, which is where the symposium was being held. And I'd flown over to present a paper on an early colour process called Dufay colour that was developed in the UK in the 1930s. And so I'm just here hanging out at this film symposium, and this guy comes up to me, he's from Tennessee, starts talking about Elvis, asks me if I want to see his movies of snake churches in Tennessee, and I mean, what more could I say? I married him. I divorced him as well, but that's another story. Let's stick to this story. Anyway, shout out to Bradley Reeves, who is the other co-founder of TAMIS. But this is where we met in 2004, and as I say, the following year. You think it was crazy enough for me to move 4,000 miles across the ocean to marry some hillbilly from Tennessee, but that was nothing compared to trying to start your own non-profit film archive. The paperwork for non-profits is a nightmare. It's second only to the immigration process. So Brad and I got married in October 2005, and a month later, TAMIS was born. Work that out for yourselves. So I registered the organisation as a non-profit with the state of Tennessee, in November 2005, and we gained our 501c3 status a few months later. Let's see. And at the time, TAMIS was unique in the state in that it was the only organisation that focused solely on audiovisual materials. So there was some ETSU, Archives of Appalachia, Country Music Hall of Fame had a great audiovisual collection. There were several other institutions around the state that collected audiovisual material, but there was no specific archive focusing only on audiovisual. And so I just want to give a shout out here to somebody else as well. But so besides, there were a lot of people who supported us in the early days, but really one in particular, I don't think he's here. One in particular who was really instrumental in providing a solid foundation for TAMIS, and someone who shared a passion for local history and recognised the value of audiovisual materials, and that was Steve Cotton, who was the manager of the McClung Collection. Sorry, I feel like I'm leaning into this. I need a walking mic. So anyway, TAMIS wouldn't have grown to what it is today without Steve Cotton's belief in us. And Steve was able to find a small space for us here in the basement, still there. A little bit bigger now though, right? Have you moved a little bit bigger? Okay. But the archive is still there. But most importantly, well, not equally as importantly, it gave us a space, a vault space, to safely store the materials. Because we had everything in our apartment at this point. Old video machines, old film winders, old film. We had everything was in our tiny little apartment in Bearden. So really, Steve Cotton was instrumental in helping this organisation, in helping TAMIS to grow into what it was. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Our focus in the early days was not only on finding material, but it was really important to us to establish strong relationships with our donors. And in many cases, it really felt like we became part of the family, because we really made a point to go and meet people in their own space and to build trust, because people were giving us their home movies and really, treasured items that were really treasured to them and that were unique. And so we made a point to go and meet people in their own space, and we went all over the state picking up material, and we really felt it was important to build that relationship with donors. And I think that those values are still really held here today. So the first collection that we acquired was an extensive home movie collection dating from 1928 through the 1980s. And the collection was from Knoxvillian Betty Minnick. The majority of the films had belonged to her father-in-law, C.C. Minnick. And I've got so much respect for Betty because she really recognised the value of these films and the value that that those home movies, those films had value beyond the immediate family. And so she held on to those films, and she was, we were eternally grateful to her for entrusting us with those, and for really that collection became the kind of bedrock of what we built TAMIS on. She was a little bit of an archivist herself. She took it on herself to do her own preservation by transferring them to VHS, which, obviously, still, we've got materials in TAMIS that if they hadn't been transferred to VHS, we would not have at all. So, it's not ideal, but she was still thinking in those terms of preservation and making them available to people in the future. Anyway, so with these films, the Minnick films were the first public screening that we did right here in the East Tennessee History Center, and we put a compilation together of the best parts of those films and put it to music, and we had an audience of 200 people, and that really proved to us that that these films would be popular with local audiences, and that they had value, historical value. And so we really made it a priority to share the collection. As the collection built up, we made it a priority to share the films with people, but particularly local audiences. And I really want to acknowledge again here the support of people, in particular Cheryl Henderson, who some of you may have known, and everyone at the Historical Society, Lisa, everybody at the Historical Society really supported the organisation right from the very beginning, and they understood the value of what we were trying to do. And so the Historical Society, Cheryl, allowed us to have film series here, and again we would attract, I think, about, is it 200, Lisa, this room holds maybe? I'm pretty sure it was a capacity of about 200, and we would pack this place, and it's really hard to describe what those events were like if you weren't there, because there was such a buzz about them. Local people engaging with their local history. Film really brings history alive. It really does. We were able to do that here, and we were able to participate in events like the History Fair. So we showed the films at Tennessee Theatre and the Bijou and many other venues. Of course, the most popular was the Kaz Walker night, where we had to do 3 screenings that night, 200 people each screening, and we had to turn people out. People were getting angry because they couldn't get in to see Kaz. But anyway, we managed to do 3 screenings that night. And one of my personal favourites was the Minnicks. I loved the local TV screenings that we did, but also the Walter Bath footage. That was really, I think, probably my favourite. And John and/or Janine are going to talk about Walter Bath's collection a little bit more. But it's an incredible collection, and I also had the honour of presenting that at the Museum of the Moving Image in New York City. And also they included some of his footage at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. So really, these films have an impact far beyond just their locality. How am I doing for time? I feel like I'm rambling. Okay, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. So, thanks to our local partners here with the Historical Society and the McClung Collection, we were able to kind of make connections with others around town and the area, and we partnered with people for the Dogwood Arts, WDVX, UT, Knox Heritage, Knoxville Jazz Festival, all kinds of events. So, the collection, not only were we building the collection, but the collection was getting used and getting seen by people. As a non-profit, we needed to raise funds, and really, both Brad and I, we really struggled with running a non-profit. We produced a DVD of TAMIS materials, and the proceeds of the sales went directly to the archives. We were able to raise grants from local foundations, and some of our board members, Tammy Kaosis in particular, was amazing at helping us with raise funds. We had support from Friends of the Library as well. Way too many to name. we also received federal grants from the National Film Preservation Foundation, and I think you're going to talk a little bit about that. Okay, I'll leave that for you. And that was mostly for films that were on nitrate stock, which is like the really flammable stock, which we weren't able to house here. So once they were preserved, we sent those to Library of Congress. And then in 2013, like I said, Brad and I were not good at the whole non-profit thing. So we transferred the ownership of the collection to the McClung Collection, Knox County Public Library. And let's see. So I'm aware that I'm going over time here. So so Brad was hired on full time then, so that made it easier for us to focus efforts on actually the collecting and preserving of the materials rather than trying to raise funds and so on. So real briefly, I just want to talk about why we started a regional film archive. And first and foremost, it's because film is part of our heritage. And real quick, a quotation from the National Foundation Film Preservation website. They say, America's film heritage is as diverse as America itself. For more than 100 years, Americans with movie cameras, professional and amateur alike, have traveled the country documenting traditions, telling stories, and recording events of the day. They've captured people and places not filmed by the mainstream media, and that was really kind of like one of our values here, was that we were looking mostly at non-theatrical film. And then I always like to share this quotation about local history from Woodrow Wilson, because it really underscores the importance of collections such as TAMIS and McClung and the Historical Society. Local history is the ultimate substance of national history. The history of a nation is only the history of its villages written large. Local history is subordinate to national only in the sense in which each leaf of a book is subordinate to the volume itself. Upon no single page will the whole theme of the book be found, but each holds a part of the theme. And again, I think that really underscores what we were thinking when we wanted to start a regional, a film archive that focused on regional materials. Just a brief list here to illustrate the variety of types of non-theatrical film at TAMIS. I don't know if this will play. I put together a little compilation of screenshots. It probably won't play though. That's okay. Those are just screenshots from the various types of film and audio there. And I think John and Janine have got some clips to show you. I think this just illustrates the types of film that we were collecting and that we hold here at TAMIS. And then lastly, I wish we'd taken more pictures of us in the field. I just wanted to share these because it shows us out there doing our collection development, collecting. We would track down collections and then go off some up mountain, down holler, and like down all these country roads trying to find these barns where these things were stored. And so I just love this because I love this tractor like hauling these videos away. And I really wish we'd taken more pictures of some of the awful places we've been hunting for film, especially the decrepit trailer out in Halls. Actually, that's in Halls too. What is about Halls? We were in a decrepit trailer in Halls, and I fell through the floor. It was rotten. It was completely rotten. I fell through the floor because I was new to this area. I didn't even think about like venomous snakes and spiders. It was only afterwards people were like, "Oh my God, you weren't scared of snakes?" And I was like, "Not snakes." And the picture of the kid, that's my stepdaughter. We even got her involved. That's her actually at an abandoned drive-in movie theatre, and she said, "Daddy, is this a film?" I said, "Oh yeah." Didn't think about snakes then either. Anyway, I'm going to conclude here. So back to the TAMIS timeline. So in 2013, TAMIS officially became part of McClung, and Brad was employed as a full-time archivist, and then funding was also found to hire an assistant archivist, and Eric Dawson was hired. Eric's now the head of McClung. I'm not sure what year that was, but it was somewhere around. Do you know, Janine?
2014 or 2000?
Was it? Yeah, I think it's 2014-15, somewhere around there. But yeah, that's just a really brief overview of how we started, why we started, and John and Janine are going to tell you all about the amazing work that's happened since then, because that's like 10 years ago, 2013, oh my God. Yeah, well, thank you. I'm going to pass you over to...
Thanks for your patience, folks. Well, yeah, thanks, Louisa, for your remarks. I really appreciate her pointing out how deliberately, but how deliberately they went about developing the collection, building rapport with local organizations and with donors. They have really set the bar high for us, and we try our best to live up to the groundwork that thank you so much, to the groundwork that they laid in those aspects. So Louisa left off with TAMIS expanding to have both a director and an assistant archivist. I came on the assistant capacity in 2016, and to kind of evoke the years between then and now, I'm going to talk about some of the programming and partnerships that we've undertaken during those years. So 2016 was a big year for music programming and interpretation at TAMIS, when TAMIS staff contributed research and rare recordings to the boutique German record label Bear Family Records' anthology of country music, gospel, jazz, and old-time recordings that were recorded in Knoxville in 1929 and 1930. Of course, we know these as the Knoxville sessions. These have been really celebrated in our community, thanks in large part to their being packaged in this deluxe CD set. And noted music scholars Ted Olson and Tony Russell also contributed to the set as well, really lending their expertise to that set. In tandem with the set being released, the History Center also put on the Come to Make Records exhibit about those recording sessions that was on display in 2016. Once again, TAMIS staff contributed research to help develop that presentation, as well as furnish some artifacts to it and help to publicize and interpret the exhibit to members of the community and museum guests. And then the feather in the cap for that big music year of 2016 was the Knoxville Stomp Music Festival. I regret that I just missed it coming here in the autumn of that year. But as I said, this is one of the most dramatic fruits of that Knoxville Sessions research and reappraisal. This was sponsored by the library in partnership with some community organizations, and the Stomp included numerous musical performances, panel presentations, and lectures by experts who interpret roots in Americana music through scholarship, performance, and through their ardent fandom. We kind of had lots of different voices involved to interpret the music, and even a record swap event. Once again, TAMIS staff were involved in all aspects of this event. I think of this, the 2016, as kind of the high water mark for TAMIS's engagement with the recorded music legacy of this region. In the intervening years, we've found ourselves focusing much more on the moving image preservation, but we maintain a large collection of historical audio. We are still actively developing that and conserving those original artifacts. And we're expecting, when really interesting opportunities arise, for the pendulum to swing back more toward interpreting the music too. So we still love the music and the local audio, even though that hasn't been quite as visible as the moving image work. Moving on, in 2017, TAMIS has hosted the Knoxville chapter of International Home Movie Day several times over the years. I know that's my favorite holiday. Anyone else's? Any other Home Movie Day fans? Louisa loves Home Movie Day. This annual event connects film archivists and historians with members of their local communities to rediscover and share local home movies on legacy formats in a public setting. So, Louisa was speaking so rapturously about some of the early TAMIS screenings. If you can imagine events like that happening annually, we did our part to have that happen here in Knoxville for a couple of years. We've been on a hiatus for time, yeah.
I think we did one in 2005 or 2006 here.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So even as early as 2000, like right off the bat in TAMIS history, that's great.
Yeah.
Our most public home movie day event since that time took place in 2017 when we exhibited an evening of highlights from the amateur film collections on Market Square under the auspices of the library's annual Movies on Market Square series that they do most every fall, if not every fall. So for that presentation, 3 local live music ensembles scored the program that played out against the backdrop of a busy Friday night in October here in the heart of downtown. So I was there for that one, and it was a lot of fun. It was great to be presenting our artifacts and have people passing by, going to the bars and the restaurants, but stopping to see what was playing on the screen. So that was, we remember that extremely fondly. When Knoxville's own independent cult and repertory theater, Central Cinema, opened in 2018, TAMIS was really gratified to be invited to contribute programming to the theater pretty much right from the outset. Central Cinema's superb presentation quality and dedicated cinephile patron base offer TAMIS a great venue to exhibit some of the more unusual or off-the-beaten-track or underappreciated artifacts from our collections in monthly free public programs. And we also like to alternate programs from our collections with bringing in feature films and sort of things that other people have done in the archival space. That is ongoing. It was on a hiatus during the pandemic, but we got a screening coming up next week, in fact. So we love Central Cinema and our partnership there. And Louisa has already talked about the Orphan Film Symposium. It's a very important academic conference for film archivists and cinema scholars. And at the 2018 conference, Louisa, who I've described as a TAMIS emeritus, that's not an official title, but I hope you think of yourself as that. Louisa brought examples from the Walter Bart collection, which she mentioned briefly and I'll say more about, brought that to the film symposium where they were enjoyed by an international audience. So we're really pleased to have gotten that exposure. 2018 also saw a really exciting partnership with the Bijou Theater and the Modern Foreign Languages and Literatures Department at the University of Tennessee. As part of a university symposium on local author Cormac McCarthy, TAMIS created a video program that combined vintage Knoxville footage and photographs with text from Cormac McCarthy's novel Suttree, which I'm sure many of you know is set in Knoxville and is really hyper-specific about its Knoxville setting. This video was accompanied by German roots band Buddy and the Huddle, and that band draws pretty much their entire artistic inspiration from the McCarthy novel Suttree, as unlikely as it may seem. It's one of those interesting Knoxville coincidences. So this Knoxville show was actually preceded by identical performances in Nuremberg, Germany, and Atlanta, Georgia. So we saw the show here in Knoxville, but that was also, once again, an instance of our footage partnering with this group to be seen by audiences much broader than just here in Knoxville. Moving on to 2019, TAMIS partnered with the Public Cinema, you may know Knoxville's micro cinema, the Public Cinema, to screen the movie Wanda, which is a earthy 1970s kind of new Hollywood independent drama that has enjoyed a really vigorous rediscovery in recent years as a masterwork by a woman director working at that time. So this screening gave us an opportunity to relate the work that we do in film preservation to this more widely publicized feature film example of the preservation project that was performed on Wanda, and to also note the ties that the director, Barbara Loden, has to the Appalachian region. So, of course, like everyone else, we come to 2020, and TAMIS had to improvise our way through the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic along with everyone else. But even in the midst of the lockdown, TAMIS staff were able to present about the archive and our specific approach to regional film archiving via video chat to students of the L. Jeffrey Selznick School of Film Preservation, organization of which Janine and I are both alumni. We also created a video for a virtual streaming a virtual streaming version of Home Movie Day programming that happened that year. This screening included material from our peer archives around the world as well as ourselves. It was presented live on YouTube, and we were lucky enough to partner with Appalachian musicians Jackie Becky and Sarah Louise to create an original score to accompany that material. So we made the best of 2020, as everyone else did or tried to do too. So as Knoxville explored open-air entertainments later in the pandemic, the following year of 2021, the Big Ears Festival tapped TAMIS to supply footage for a public concert featuring Knoxville area musicians. And once again, Cormac McCarthy's Suttree provided the through line, the inspiration for this event as well. So we got great feedback for this concert that took place on a summer evening at Lakeshore Park, I believe it was. Shifting back to a global scale, a longtime friend of TAMIS contacted us to include archive footage in an internet program hosted by an Italian film festival, the Pesaro Film Festival. So I never would have guessed that we would have partnered with an Italian film festival to show this footage online, but everyone who tuned into that stream saw some footage of East Tennessee Christmas morning. Coming via Italy, of course. Last year was an equally exciting year for exhibiting TAMIS footage to a broad audience. Eric Dawson, who we've mentioned, the director of the Calvin M. McClung Collection, completed work on an archival film titled Electric Appalachia. That's an anthology film that kind of meditates on the legacy of TVA development here in Appalachia. This was a film that was commissioned by Big Ears and the harp and guitar duo Mary Lattimore and William Tyler. So that film had an exhibition at the Big Ears Festival last year with live accompaniment by that duo. And TAMIS footage once again made an appearance at the Orphan Film Symposium. We couldn't be there in person in Montreal to present the footage, but we presented a program virtually once again for that international audience. And we really closed out 2022 on a high note with Eric Dawson presenting Electric Appalachia, representing it in New York City for a live event programmed as part of the Silent Films Live Music Screening Series, which is organized by John Schaefer, who's with WNYC there in New York City and hosts the radio show New Sounds, which has a really interesting fan base and following. So Eric was present for the event. You can see him right there in the corner. And we were really pleased once again to connect our footage with an audience who's maybe discovering, not only our footage, but maybe getting a new representation of Appalachia that they hadn't considered before. And we were really pleased to play a part of that. Yeah.
Were any of these programs recorded?
Several of them were.
And are they available to the public?
Some of them are. I think the Buddy and the Huddle performance, at least for a time, was available on YouTube. I would have to sort of trace breadcrumbs to find where it is, but yeah, several of them have been recorded.
Have you done any linkage up with Knoxville history at all, or are you separate from them, or
Knoxville
do you have like an archives that the public can access?
Yeah, the best way for the members of the public to connect with our collections are to contact us directly, and Janine will talk more about how we're hoping to develop different access options.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. So finishing up, talk about programming. While we had that programming ongoing, we also were continuing different preservation efforts to continue to safeguard the collections. Let's see what I have displayed here. And as Louisa noted, lots of the early preservation projects funded by the National Film Preservation Foundation that TAMIS undertook were centered on artifacts that exist on nitrate film stock. Excuse me, and those tended to be professional films or promotional films shot by professionals, as I say. Companies would contract to have promotional films made. And so that's really delicate, demanding work. it was really necessary to secure the grant funding to get those projects completed. So Louisa and Brad did a great job in safeguarding the nitrate-based artifacts that show kind of that business, very professional version. Looks at local history. And so for our preservation work in the past years, since 2016, we pivoted more towards having those nitrate artifacts safeguarded to more amateur films, more of those home movies where they weren't produced by a professional firm and they weren't produced for a promotional purpose, but are more personal looks at Knoxville history, sort of like Louisa mentioned with the Minute Collection. So if I'm able to pull up, I do have a compilation video with some clips here to showcase, thank you so much, to talk about some of the collections we've targeted in recent years. Let's go there. Perfect, thank you so much. So one of these collections is our Harry Caldwell collection, which is a really fascinating collection of films that was created by Mr. Caldwell, who was a missionary to China with the Methodist Church from the early 1900s to about 1940. This collection was donated to the McClung Collection even before TAMIS was established, so they received it from McClung at the time they joined. And this is a really interesting case study of the diversity of material that we have here at TAMIS, where, of course, this collection doesn't depict East Tennessee, it depicts activities in China. So even though it's not the content isn't closely linked to our region, there's the story of the gentleman from this region who went to China, was involved in ministry there, and has these films that offer a really interesting glimpse at a sort of agricultural life and folk religions in China during that phase. So for these video compilations, I'm going to compare an earlier generation transfer of some of these various films with the professional transfers that we were able to have made at a professional film lab. This is an earlier generation transfer. And I want to stress that, that the transfers, the shortcomings in the quality of this transfer, it's not as though Brad and Louisa didn't know what they were doing. This is just an earlier generation of technology and means that were available to the archive at that time. And now we've switched to the professional quality film scan. I hope you'll notice the difference in clarity and the brightness of the image comparing the two generations of preservation. So I really think this is useful, and they're switching back and forth between generations of preservation again to show how these are cases where the work that we can do with these artifacts, because in these cases they're deteriorated and they're very fragile, it exceeds what we're able to do in-house, but thanks to the partnership with the federal funding, we can give these films a new lease on life and preserve this really fascinating material. Continue with comparing examples from this collection for another minute or so. If you have any questions or remarks about this footage, I invite you to speak up.
John?
Yes?
On the newer version, there was a lot more, is that because of degradation in the film?
Yes, because about a decade had elapsed between these two different transfers. During that decade, the films unfortunately suffered further degradation. So it's kind of contradictory that in the earlier versions of the transfers, the artifacts themselves are in better shape, but we have the better transfers of the more degraded versions, and we're confronting the artifacts as we have them and doing what we can in the moment that we have the funding and the partnership with the lab. Yes, sir.
What's the current format? Is there one format that everything film goes on today?
For digitization?
Yeah, is it all digital? Is everything digital?
Digital it's the most popular for kind of films and media that are going to actively circulate, whether that's in movie theaters or online. And of course, there are options for making digital versions, as we do, of a variety of older legacy formats.
So everything from like Super 8 to VCR to video to 35, 50 millimeter is going to digital. It's all digital. It's being digitized.
In cases where people want to reintroduce that material into a current exhibition environment, digital is going to be the way to do it. There are lots of barriers for that always being the case.
Now, how do you store like film that has just been redone, and like that, the clip you just showed. What is that on today? Is that digital?
Yeah, Janine is going to say a little more about that during her remarks. So, following up on the Caldwell collection, one of the next collections we targeted for preservation was our beloved Walter Bart collection, again through the same grant from the National Film Preservation Foundation. Like the Caldwell collection, this is a story that, or rather collection that its ties to East Tennessee, in terms of the depicted content, are not as strong as some of the others, but it's this really interesting story of a immigrant gentleman from Germany who ultimately settled in the region. And sort of as a bonus, the collection does include some really interesting glimpses of East Tennessee when Mr. Bart traveled through this region. So this is a large collection, and importantly, thanks to the efforts of Louisa and Brad, they're sharing news of the collection. It already had some champions in the film preservation field more broadly. So we're going to see some examples, once again, of the earlier generation transfers that Brad and Louisa made, and some of the grant-funded work that we had done at a professional film lab. And this part of the presentation, I understand that it's new for a lot of audiences, or there might be a learning curve with understanding, all the urgency that's involved with having these films professionally reformatted, especially because we can do so much work here in the office, but part of the grant process is having these new digital versions accompanied by brand new film negatives and film prints. And in our minds, it's a principle in the field that is the highest level of preservation that we can conduct on these artifacts. So in addition to these digital versions, we're getting new film copies from these grants that were awarded. And that gives us the greatest level of confidence that these artifacts are going to survive for decades and even centuries to come if we do our jobs correctly. So once again, I think that you can see a dramatic difference between the older legacy transfers and the brand new transfers we got back from the lab. This collection has these really fascinating glimpses of life in privileged German society in the late 20s, moving into the early 30s, during what we think of as the Weimar era of German history. So between the economic crises that Germany was undergoing in the 20s and before fascist influences in the Third Reich really began to take hold in the 30s. So we are really pleased that we have this fascinating window on German society at that specific moment in time, and that we're able to preserve it and share it, ideally not just with folks here in East Tennessee, but also from scholars anywhere who might take an interest in that era of German history. We would love for them to get in touch with us about it. If you know any, please pass word along.
Are you in contact with other archives around, say, the state or the country? Are they aware of what you have, and are you aware of what they have, so you could...
Not as much as we'd like to be, and once again, that's something that Janine will say a few more remarks about too here in just a minute. And the last preservation project I want to talk about is a collection that we have called the David Swartz Collection. Mr. Swartz was involved with a Presbyterian mission in the community of Vardy up in Hancock County, which is a community that has a lot of its community members have a Melungeon heritage. And in fact, some of the photographs you see displayed in this room depict historic glimpses of the Vardy community. So this is a film that, for us to the preservation project, we were really gratified that the folks in Vardy already are so diligent about preserving their history. We were able to coordinate with them to undertake this project in a way that was useful for them and how they curate their heritage as well. It was a smaller, simpler project than some of the others that we've mentioned, but one that is nevertheless quite dear to our hearts. We'll go ahead and show some before and after comparisons. This is not going to be quite as dramatic because this film, the original film, is still in very good shape, but compared to the earlier two collections which I showed, this is on a smaller gauge of film stock. This film is on 8mm film instead of 16mm film. However, for the preservation, we created new film elements in 16mm because our theory is that as the traditional film lab infrastructure continues to sort of downsize and reshuffle in the digital era, it's going to be an advantage to have those artifacts on that more robust format. If they ever need to go back to the lab or have any additional work done, we'll be glad that we have them on the 16mm format rather than the 8. And this film dates from 1946, 1947. It's not included here in these clips I have now, but there's another moment in the film where the filmmaker has gone out of his way to film a series of electrical poles, and we learned from members of the community that was that area had only just received electrical service at that time, so the poles were an exciting new addition to the community. And I'll underscore that it's the same original film artifact, but just given the treatment with the different generations of digitization technology, we're able to present it, at different improved levels of clarity and improved sense of what this community really looked like before it was committed to film. So that's why we're so interested in conserving those original artifacts, because who knows what fabulous new preservation process is yet to be developed that we might be able to, kind of reclaim even more from these vintage film artifacts that we're conserving here at TAMIS. So that concludes what I have for the presentation. Now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Janine Winfrey.
Hey everybody. So my name is Janine Winfrey, and I'm the newest addition to TAMIS. I joined as the assistant audiovisual archivist just about a year ago. And so Louisa gave you a great overview of TAMIS's beginnings, and John shared some of the work we're doing currently, and I'm going to do my best to predict the future of the Tennessee Archive of Moving Image and Sound. So TAMIS is near and dear to my heart. I wasn't exaggerating when I told Eric Dawson during the interviews last year that this position is my dream job. I went to the Selznick School for Film Preservation in 2018 when I learned of John's professional and educational background, and then volunteered here when I graduated from that program. The mission and history of TAMIS makes it a fascinating and exciting place, and I was ecstatic to finally join the team last year. As TAMIS is just a small team of 2, bringing in a new person helps for an organization to evaluate current processes and create ideas for the future, which is why I'm eager to discuss some of what TAMIS will face in the years to come as we grow as an organization. First, I'd like to talk about what's going on with our film collections in the next decade. So John showed in some of those clips how the film degraded, and it might have surprised some of you that just a difference of 10 years introduced so many different artifacts to that film. So it's a reality in our field that the materials that we work with are very old and as a result often in a state of decay. The film that we work with is called acetate, or film or safety film, which is an alternative to the flammable nitrate film, which we moved to Library of Congress. All of the collection that we have now is on safety stock. So this film was introduced as an alternative to nitrate film, and 16mm film, one of the earliest home movie formats, was actually introduced 100 years ago this year, so in 1923. And these films were created on a base called triacetate. And so the great thing about triacetate film is that it's safer for the consumer, but the bad thing is that it suffers from a condition known as vinegar syndrome. Sorry about that. So vinegar syndrome is unsurprisingly named for its smell. Triacetate film is made with acetic acid, which gives off a vinegar odor. If we open a can of film and it smells like a bag of salt and pepper chips, or salt and vinegar chips, we know that the film is suffering from decay. It's important that we isolate these films, as the off-gassing can actually infect healthy film and speed up their decay. Unfortunately, there is no stopping vinegar syndrome. All we can do is slow it down. It's not a matter of if, but when. So what we do is we keep the film in cold storage. And TAMIS is very lucky to share vault space with the McClung Collection. However, that means that our storage facilities are often decided by the common denominator of what is safe for paper materials to be stored at. So we have 2 vaults to house our collection. Healthy film that is not yet exhibiting signs of vinegar syndrome, is stored in our coldest vault on basement level 1. This is a storage condition of about 60 degrees Fahrenheit and 35% relative humidity. And according to filmcare.org, these conditions mean that our healthiest film will stay stable for 135 years, which is great. But bad news means that any film that is in the beginning stages of vinegar syndrome will worsen in just 25 years. We keep some of the film most affected by vinegar syndrome in basement level 2 so that it will not infect our healthy film. The change of just a few degrees to 62 degrees Fahrenheit and 50% relative humidity means that unfortunately these films face a worse fate than the ones on B1, with only 9 years until their condition worsens. This means it's necessary that we prioritize the film in bad condition for on-site digitization when possible, and for films that are beyond our capabilities, we seek grant opportunities to have these professionally restored in film preservation labs. Knowing how these films improve in colder and drier conditions, our future plans for TAMIS might include other storage possibilities, perhaps even utilizing some of our freezers that we have to keep our worst film in stable conditions until grant funding can be secured. So what about the future of the field as a whole? So TAMIS is a small regional archive and does not have the capabilities that some of the national film archives do. However, I'd like to touch on just briefly on some of the trends that are emerging in the field. The good news is that while TAMIS may have limited capacities in working with decaying acetate film, the technology to work with these films is improving all of the time. Now you saw those comparisons of before and after of those films. It's just getting better and better. So everyone working in the field is aware of the looming issues of vinegar syndrome, and these labs are prepared to work with these materials. And digital storage is improving every year. TAMIS currently has a server supported through the McClung Collection and the Knox County Public Library, which we store our digital files on, complete with backups to fulfill the concept that we call locks, or lots of copies keep stuff safe. However, IT has identified improved storage that we may consider in the future if we can receive funding to secure it, with better discoverability of files and easier sharing with off-site researchers. So as scanning technology improves, our file sizes get bigger, and this means that we're actually seeing new technology that can scan film at 4K and even higher. People are just pushing the limits of how much you can take these little tiny strips of film and make huge digital files out of them. So digital storage is necessary to keep these large files safe, and the field is considering new digital storage technologies to ensure that digital files are safe for generations to come. Currently, it's necessary to migrate digital files and run data fixity checks to ensure they're staying safe on servers. But what future technology might emerge to write a file today that can be read the same way in 100 years without you having to do anything with it? So most importantly, despite any of these new emerging technologies, the biggest lesson that we can all have learned in this field is don't throw away anything. As we've mentioned in this presentation so far, previously people mastered a tape. That's what they thought was best 30 years ago. And sometimes people threw out what they had. It was like, well, this is as good as it's going to get. We don't need these anymore. And then, what do you know? Now we have HD, now we have 4K, and it's just getting better and better. So even if a film, we think it might be too far gone, we do not get rid of the film. We find a new way to store it, and we keep it until somebody has developed a way to get those images off the film. So as technology improves for film scanning and digital storage, the conditions of the analog artifacts remain in question. And the majority of TAMIS collections that are available are 16mm and 8mm films from what I like to call the Kodachrome era, so like 1940s to 1970s. And these home movies give priceless insight into local culture and historical moments. And the great news is that these films can survive for hundreds of years in the right conditions, and that films over 100 years old are viewable today. But can we say the same thing about AV materials made 50 years ago? Magnetic media formats were popularized in the 1980s, and for myself, born in the 90s, most of my childhood home movies are on VHS or mini DV, and these materials are already suffering. The tape decks are no longer serviced, with most who are familiar with how they work having retired or moved on to other professions. And beyond that, the tapes themselves are suffering. The lifespan for a VHS tape is 30 years, and that is maxing its limits. Now, I'm 31, so we're already seeing these tapes from the 90s and the 80s, the 70s, even those materials are unable to be stored in freezer storage like we can with film, and they're just going to get worse. So we need to grapple with the reality that we have to work to save these films before they become unusable, and impress it upon potential donors that we need to start thinking about how to make sure the material from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s will be discoverable for the people 100 years from now before they're gone. So some people may not be aware that TAMIS has more than audiovisual collections. We also have a large materials related to different talent in the area, or shows or channels, anything like that, of manuscripts and photograph collections. So one thing that we would like to do as we move forward is to process these collections and make them available to the public, to digitize them, and also to catalog them. Now, we're doing a lot of cataloging right now. I think we have about 21 collections with some sort of record in our discoverable online catalog, and we encourage you to look at that. So right now our problem is, if a researcher contacts the library and says, I want to know all about radio logs of local stations, what can you tell me? Now, Joanna, the McClung archivist, asks us, and then we talk amongst ourselves. It's like, oh, I know on a shelf back there's a box labeled radio transcription logs. What's going to happen in 10 years when we're not here? Or if somebody else, where are they going to know what those are? So it's important that we start processing these, maybe using students, have them come in and help us, because there is such a backlog of these materials that need to be grappled. And also, we'd like to improve our audio inventory so we continue to grow our regional artifacts. So what do we do now? We focus on digitizing film in the backlog and continue getting donations from the community. We want to improve the discoverability of our collections through cataloging and bring awareness to researchers, not just here, but throughout the country. We also want to mentor new generations of film archivists. Like I mentioned, I started here as a volunteer back in 2018, 2019, and now I work here, and I'm very satisfied to work here. How many other students out there would be fascinated to know that this is a field that they can gain experience in? So we'll continue to bring up interns and fellows and students to get them into a new generation of film archivists. And we want to build connections with regional archives to strengthen Tennessee history, and continue doing programming like today, where we are recording the TAMIS legacy and basically ensuring that we are very aware of TAMIS's beginnings and where it's moving forward. In addition, we're also expanding TAMIS in that we have moved from that one little tiny room that Louisa talked about to the adjacent room. So now John and I are not 3 feet from each other at all times. We can move our arms without hitting each other. It's great. So in conclusion, I'm very excited for the future of TAMIS. We have a very strong team together. We're both graduates of the L. Jeffrey Selznick School for Film Preservation, so we are certified in film preservation, and we are able to do what's best for our materials. I wanted to end with this quote from Knoxville film editor, author, and educator Laura Thornburg, because it is Women's History Month. It's March Women's History Month. And I think it's very interesting, although some people might not know this, but film archives, the modern understanding of film archives, were pioneered by women. Much like Louisa Trott, some of the earliest film archives were founded by women. And we continue to see that a lot of the donations that come in, it's the women who are the historians and their families who say, hey, I found these films. We want you to take care of them. So just to continue celebrating in spirit of Women's History Month, this quote from Laura Thornburg. Motion pictures overcome time and space. By means of them, rapid processes can be slowed down and analyzed, slow processes can be accelerated, inanimate objects animated, dead facts to live and pulsate. Attention can be held and concentrated, and the memory more deeply impressed by moving image projected on a brightly illuminated screen in a darkened room than by ordinary teaching methods. Thank you. Now it is 1 p.m. on the dot, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask them at this time, though be aware that we are technically over time.
So everything is now just a matter of collection. It's not so much. It's more you're looking for donations and collections instead of the public having access.
So as we digitize and collect material, we do our best to make them accessible to the public. The way that we do so is we have a Vimeo page, which is like it's like YouTube. So we do upload clips to Vimeo and share them online, but also if any researcher gets in contact with us, or even just a member of the public, it's like, do you have anything on this? We will share those files. Okay. So what we want to do is move it away from the direct contact way of discoverability into a casual browsing of a catalog or things like that.
See, that's what I was thinking, because, Knoxville History has YouTube channel, and I was thinking if there was something along that line. Vimeo, you said it is?
Yes, and if you go to our Facebook, the Tennessee Archive of Moving Image and Sound on Facebook, we often share links from the Vimeo, and you can follow through on those and see the rest of what we have online.
Would that be the best platform to go to for seeing the collections that are available at this time?
At this time, yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you.
I can't, if I may, I just add to that it was always our intention when we started the archive that materials were made available either through like actually sharing the material online, but also through documenting it and the discoverability through metadata. But Brad and I were never able to do that, and so we like built the collections, and we did it in a whatever they teach you in film school. And I should say, Brad, another shout out to Brad, also a graduate of the Selznick School. I graduated from UEA in the UK, but whatever they teach you in school, I mean, everyone knows this, it's like in the real world, you can't always apply it. So, I think our strength was that we managed to build the collection, and then, we were never able to actually to build the catalogue, if you like, or finding aids. But I think Eric and John and Janine have done a great job in managing to get some finding aids out, so some of the collections are actually discoverable through metadata. And I know it's only going to get better as well. So that's
it just seems like the normal progression of recorded history, whether it's old newspapers put on microfilm to pictures from McClung on whatever. This is just the next technological step, and I think it's great.
Yeah.
Now, how much is private and public funded for this?
Since we're part of the public library system now, our biggest expenses that are sort of really specific to TAMIS are the payroll for the 2 staff members, and that's all part of the library, and
it's part of the library budget then.
That's correct. And we get support through how the McClung Collection is structured for budgets for supplies and other things like that. The reason we are so intent about pursuing the grant funding for the film preservation is because that's just those are expenses kind of a different order, and we're able to partner with that agency, so that's the best way we can use our resources here in the library system.
I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. We're glad to be here too. And also mention, thinking back to cataloging, we've made the most progress toward getting collections and artifacts cataloged when over recent years we've really made some great connections to cooperate with the cataloging system that the McClung Collection already had in place. So rather than us reinventing the wheel for our catalog, once we were able to integrate what we do with their cataloging system, that's when we start to make the most progress. So we really benefit from the support of being part of that department.
So it'll all be intertwined then within a network of the museum.
Yes.
And fantastic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think John answered my question.
Oh,
Okay, great. Anything else?
Photographs. What kind of photographs are you collecting?
The photographs that we collect are photographs that support the moving image and recorded sound artifacts and the legacies of the people who created them. So of course, our colleagues on the third floor, as we say, in the McClung Collection, they are much more involved with curating the photographic legacy of Knoxville. What we do is more incidental and in support of our collections.
How about news channels, things like that? News stations? Are they giving you their old footage? I would find it difficult to believe that they have their own archives.
I'd like to let Louisa answer that question because I think she probably has some stories to tell.
I have a few. So Brad Reeves, he used to work at Channel 10 on their archive, and that archive was donated to actually to the McClung Collection at the time rather than TAMIS, but it's kind of all in the same umbrella now. But very often news stations will get rid of their film, or they want to monetize it. And I'm not going to go into details about specific organizations, but some organizations still do want to monetize their collections. And things have changed drastically since 2005 in terms of how we share images now. Things are a lot more open. People are a lot more willing to put things online. Previously, people were very guarded about copyrights and licensing and so on. But anyway, Channel 10 had a huge film archive and video archive. Channel 6, their collection also came here. And
was most of that 35 or
no, 16.
They shoot in video?
16
Oh,
little,
16?
because they were little handheld,
Oh, my.
they would go and film. So
What did they
some of
shoot?
them are on teeny little rolled up, tightly bound little
I've seen
things
them.
like that. Yeah.
And but I thought they went from 16 to video
Yeah, video, U-matic, 3/4 inch
because it was
U-matic.
cheaper, and they also taped over video, so you don't have to.
Yeah. I mean,
So you don't have
TV
the
stations.
need
So
for an archive
the 2-inch quad video, which you saw us hauling off in a tractor there. Those were broadcast quality tapes, and those were very much used. When U-matics came in, they were a little more affordable. So U-matics is kind of like an oversized VHS cassette, and they tended to store those more rather than reuse them because
really?
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they did not that they didn't reuse them, but they tended to hold on to those because by then they realised the value of reusing footage.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
did you have a question? Oh, sorry, I thought I heard. Okay.
What's the format now that news stations
It's
shoot
digital.
in? Is it digital?
It's a digital
It's
camera,
digital.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or what you got in your hand right there.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
One thing that's interesting too is that I talked about VHS tapes, but something that may surprise the few of you that are still here, I don't know, but like DVDs, CDs, lifespan of 10 years.
Yeah.
10 years. I have bought DVDs from McKay's that do not play. So just be aware that if you have precious materials on DVD, on VHS, it is the time to move them into a new format, which is digital. And thank you guys so much for all of your great questions. We are far over time. Thank you for coming out.